Hey everyone, Matt Thomas here. Thanks for watching. So I've got some really cool information about the science of successful learning. We now, when I say we, I guess, neuroscience and education, we know what successful learning looks like literally, like from the brain. We know how successful learning happens, at least from the brain's perspective. So let me show you this. I think this is really important for all teachers to know, so that we kind of know what the cycle is. We just have to figure out how to achieve it, right? So the number one determining factor of success is enjoyment with achievement. So we know that. I've done other videos on that. If a person enjoys what he or she is doing and feels like he or she's getting better at it, they're more apt to continue, right? So we know that if someone's enjoying what they're doing and getting better at it, they're going to continue it. The key is, how do we keep that going, right? And if you want to see my video on that more in depth, I linked it here, number one determining factor of success. All right, so let's get into this. This is credit cognitive scientist Dr. Scott Boland for this visual. Well, I Google imaged the visual, but anyway, I credit him for kind of like presenting this information. So the highest concentration of endorphin receptors are in the learning center of the brain, which means we are hardwired to enjoy learning, right? Learning makes us feel good. We're hardwired to enjoy learning. And not only that, when learning happens, we get a dopamine release in that learning center, which means enjoyable learning is highly addictive. So again, the brain is hardwired to enjoy learning. And when that happens, we become addicted to it. And so for many of us, essentially, we're lifelong learners, right? Because something in us sparked it, and we're just continuing to learn. And when we get bored, which could be from a lack of dopamine release, we want to seek out more learning. So let me show you this visual. Sorry it's so elementary. I just Google imaged this, and it was the only one that came up. So this is Dr. Scott Boland's. This is kind of his analogy here. This is kind of his visual. So the endorphin receptors are, they show learning kind of based on a upside down U. So this is his visual here. Familiarity, there's a link between familiarity and pleasure. So the more familiar a person is with something, the less pleasurable learning becomes. If you look at the chart here, if something's completely unfamiliar, meaning completely foreign, there's not a lot of buy-in. Like if a person can't comprehend what's being shared, it's not going to be that enjoyable. So if I start speaking in a language that a person doesn't know, they're going to be totally disengaged. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. If something becomes too familiar, I'm going to use the English standards just because I'm an English teacher. Nouns are taught in 3rd grade. They're still taught in 8th grade. They're still taught in 10th grade, right? If something is becoming too familiar, it's not that engaging. It becomes boring, and people just don't pay attention as much. So if you look at this chart, the key is to reach this, what I call a learning arc. So you want to have that balance where something, you're teaching a student something that's familiar-ish to them. They're learning it. It's not too familiar to where they're getting bored, but familiar. They're learning it. They're enjoying it. They're getting better at it. And then there's a peak where it's like, all right, it's starting to become too familiar. They start to drop off, start to get bored. What we want to do as educators is find that peak. And that's kind of up to us, right? If it's, let's say you're doing a quick write, it's a 3-minute quick write, spend 3 minutes on it. Don't spend 15 minutes on it. Things like that. If you're doing a project that's going to take a day, don't spend 4 days on it. So, along those lines, and I have more examples of that later on. So again, the key is we want to take our students to that arc, that peak. When it starts to drop off, that's when we go to the next thing. And so that's what successful learning looks like. That's what it looks like in the actual brain, right? And so we want to keep repeating that cycle. So how can we use this? Because that's ultimately the best thing when it comes to teachers. How can we use this? So we want to essentially differentiate our instruction enough to where students are given more opportunities to learn similar concepts in a way that's either new to them, fun, yet still challenging. essentially, we need to slow down. Less material, more opportunities to master that. I've talked about that in my cross-curricular instruction video. I highly encourage teachers to use cross-curricular instruction. It's supported by neuroscience as one of the best ways for lifelong learning, right? So if you want to see the videos, I've clicked the videos there. Feel free to click that and watch that. But, okay, let me give you an example. So how can we use this? As an English teacher, this is what I did in English. And even if you're not an English teacher, if you know my example, you might kind of get an idea of how to do it in your subject. So in English, I was really big on hiding essays. Because if students hear that you're doing an essay, it's like, oh, automatically they get deflated. So I would hide the essays. And really an essay is essentially just making your argument, supporting your argument, and analyzing your argument. That's kind of it in a nutshell, right? And so I can use that across the board in so many parts of life. There's so many outside world connections when it comes to making an argument, supporting your argument, and then analyzing it. So in my class, we would write at least 20 essays a year. And before you go, dude, Matt, seriously? 20 essays a year? Holy cow, that's boring. No, not at all. The key is to hide it, right? Remember, let's look at the science of how successful learning looks. It's taking the students to that peak of the learning arc to where they're familiar with something, that they're making an argument, but in a way that's new, different, fun, challenging. And then once they're like, okay, we got this, then switch to something else. So what I would do is we would do, now if you were to ask my students how many essays we wrote, they would probably say 4. Because I would have like 4 what you would call standard essays, right? We'd write those 4 a year. But in the middle, in between those, we did so much type of like argumentative writing. They would not be able to identify that they're essays until the end of the year when I explained it. So we would have like our typical essays. You know, you make an argument, you support it, and then you analyze it. And the analysis would be explaining how the quote's relevant to the argument, and then either long-term analysis or significance, you know, etc. The axes format, you could say, of writing. But what I would do is, so in addition to the 4, what you would say, standard essays, we would read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in graphic novel form because it's fun and it's new and exciting and it gets to the point of what we're trying to do. And then we'd analyze both sides of our personality, right? So there's the side that when we're in school, then there's a side when we're at home or with our friends and with our parents. So we'd analyze the 2 sides. And then we would talk about the importance of both sides and why it's relevant and when to use it, etc. Essentially, we're writing an essay. Then we would do what's called Circle of Friends, where I ask them to analyze themselves and 4 friends and talk about how, like, identify what role each friend plays in their life and that specific trait of that friend and how important it could be used in life, if it is a good thing or a bad thing, if that person continues with the trait, etc., etc. We're writing an essay, right? They're writing an argumentative essay without an intro and a conclusion. And then I put on the screen there the 22 different ways of writing. We would do marketing analysis. I mean, marketers, their job, advertising people's job is to take money from us. Their whole job is to take our money. They're really good at making arguments, right? And showing long-term impact and showing the importance of this and analysis, all this stuff. Essay writing. And so then we would analyze marketing, and then I would have students create infomercials when it came to speeches. They would have to use their argumentative skills, etc., etc., etc. The point is, I would do the exact same thing with my students, 22 different ways, in ways that are fun and relevant, which is obviously the #1 determining factor of success. It's got to be fun, relevant, exciting, enjoyment, something that you see as purposeful. Anyway, if you're like, okay, cool, like, give us some more stuff about this. I've linked these other videos, the lesson planning pacing. It follows this exact learning arc format. So the format, this video, if you want to see how to properly plan your lessons in a way that follows the format of learning, of how our brain learns, watch that lesson plan pacing video. I've got another video, Great Ways to Begin Class, because it's going to look differently in your class and my class. If I'm an English teacher and you're a biology teacher, it may be the same format or formula, but how you teach it, right? Your subject's going to be different than mine. And then I've got another video, Great Alternative Assessments, as opposed to just giving a test. So please watch that. But keep in mind, as you're lesson planning, keep in mind how great learning, how great learning, how it looks on a neurological level, right? This is exactly how successful learning happens. Thanks for watching.